Hello. Welcome to the Peaceful Anarchism on the Voluntary Virtues Network every Thursday at 1 p.m. And you could also find me on theconsciousresistance.com and theseedsofliberty.com. So today we have Jeffrey Till coming in from South Carolina. He's a voluntarist, atheist, peaceful parenter, unschooling, homeschooling parent of a 10-year-old, 7-year-old, and a 4-year-old. He was on the Chuck Morris Speaks show on American Radio Network, which is a nationally syndicated radio show. He's a writer for Liberty.me. And the way I found him was through the School Sucks podcast. He was interviewed by Brett Benoit, I think that's how you say it, on his article, The Complete Case for Home Education, 54 Arguments. A massive article about all the ridiculous arguments that people have, or complaints people have, about homeschoolers or unschoolers. Awesome read. I highly recommend it. We'll include that in the description. And he also has a blog, 500years.org, 500 years spelled out, .org. And then a Facebook page is called Jeff Till's FHY. So, Jeff, thanks for coming on the show.
Hi, Danilo. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, definitely. I've been, I heard you on the School Sucks. I'm like, oh man, I got to get this guy. I love, because I have kids too. I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and so I do a lot of writing about homeschooling and unschooling, and talking about government schools and what they teach, what's the actual lessons that they teach. It's not just that America's number one, although that's one of the primary ones.
Yeah.
So this is really sentimental topic for me. I'm very passionate about it as well. So can you start us off with how you became a voluntarist? What got you down this path? Books or podcasts or personalities, things like that.
Sure. I think I've always been to some degree. I never really had any sort of socialist leanings or conservative leanings, but I've always sort of picked my worldview from sort of a Chinese menu of things that did turn out to be libertarian in nature. Probably about say 15 or 17 years ago, I read Atlas Shrugged. And back then, the internet was not what it was today, so I was pretty much alone. So I had to just find things that were available. So I would get Cato books and subscribe to Reason magazine. Then in 2007, we saw the Ron Paul campaign come through, and I was just sort of blown away that there was a libertarian on TV, and that sort of led me to find a bunch of other stuff. The whole Mises gang, then found Peter Schiff, then found Stefan Molyneux and Freedom in Radio. And then later, School Sucks Project. And all of this has sort of further radicalized me from being someone who thought he had a couple ideas and not really a political vocabulary, to someone who has a very sort of deep hobby, learning about ethics, economics, schooling, politics, etc.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned radicalized, because from our perspective, we're not radical. It's like we don't consider ourselves radical. We just consider ourselves like, how radical is it to want to personalize and individualize education to each kid, rather than send them off to a place where they're treated as as a conformist subject or number in a classroom of 30 people with one teacher. Like, how can you really expect the child to get any sort of individual education in an environment like that, right? So
yeah, I mean, even as I got deeper and deeper into the education topic, school became more and more repulsive to me, to the point where it started off as just being a state of nature that you have to go and everyone goes, and all the way to the point where, like, what am I doing sending my kids somewhere for 40 hours a week where they're largely unhappy, and they're sort of fed the same piece of information that everyone else has, and they're being graded, and they're made to take tests, and they're made to ask for permission to go to the bathroom, and all this sort of helpless, terrible, all of a sudden it seems like a really monstrous thing to do when you scrutinize what education or schooling is in the public arena. And so it became to the point where, it doesn't feel radical. It feels like it would be, radically cruel to actually make them go.
Yeah, exactly. And I tell people who are trying to dissuade me from doing this is like, so honestly, how can you look back at your experience in public school, and how can you tell yourself with a straight face in the mirror and say, I want to send my kid to a place that it didn't enjoy myself, and isn't that a bit sadistic?
Yeah, I just wrote an article on this very topic. I was asked to submit. Uh, there's another voluntarist who's putting a book together on unschooling and asked for submissions. And
Is that
I took
Skylar Collins?
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
okay,
Were you asked to do it as well?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to interview him as well, but yeah, I should do that too. That's a good idea.
Yeah, I think.
Great.
Well, I think he's looking. He reached out to do submissions. I haven't met Skylar. We just sort of passed notes in Facebook like you and I did.
Yeah.
But I wrote the article. I wrote the gist of it is that to be able to unschool your children is that you first have to imagine yourself being unschooled. Like, could I have been successful had I not gone to school myself? And until you do that analysis of what I've gotten the right knowledge I wanted to get, would I've been able to pursue other opportunities, would I've been able to manage my time better, would I've been happier, all of those kind of things. If you can imagine them upon yourself and sort of deschool yourself in that thinking, then you'll have the required empathy to be able to apply that to your children. But I don't think if anyone doesn't believe that they could have been successful with unschooling, if they don't believe that themselves, I don't think they can really believe that for their children, and they'll probably always have this bit of doubt that even after they make the intellectual case, and that's even takes a long time to make too, is to make the educational case that okay, I understand that the school was designed by the Prussians to convince military people. It is boring. It is the wrong knowledge. It is obedience. It is apathy. It is conformity. All those things take a long time to understand, but I really don't think it's until you develop empathy for your children that you can really apply unschooling to them.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a person I was talking to about this, actually a family member, and they said that when I was younger, I went to a public school where they could beat me, right? And I learned to love learning. Like I loved learning as a result of that. I'm like you need pain.
Yeah.
to
Oh,
learn
really?
that
So that's what they confessed to?
Yeah. It's a very strange confession because
Yeah.
I was basically saying they're forced to learn this information that they have no choice in the matter. It's not up to them. It's up to the curriculum and whoever chooses what they have to learn. But and the bureaucrats, I guess. But but that's the whole thing. When you bring up force, the element of force as it relates to anything that's government, people get they get fidgety. They don't like to hear that side of it. That you have no choice. That yes, there's compulsory education. Compulsory attendance laws. There's truancy. What happens if you don't go to school? Your parents get fined, or they can get arrested or in prison. Like what? Seriously?
Yeah. No one sees that. Doesn't see the force behind it, and people I've talked to get really angry if I mention that, because I think they do the whole ethical calculation in their head, maybe not as quickly as you or I can. But if we think that forcing people to do something is morally wrong, and if we think taking their money to pay for it is morally wrong, then that makes school unethical or immoral. And that's kind of a really scary thought for people to have, especially if they have their kids in school, and especially if they had school inflicted upon them themselves. Now, were you? I presume you went to public school.
Of course, of course I did.
Yep, and so did your wife. Did you have a hard time bringing her along to the unschooling idea?
Well, I think like yourself, I am more read in this voluntarism and the peaceful parenting and all that kind of stuff. So I'm more deep into the philosophy. So yeah, I had to more talk to her about these concepts. Actually, but one thing I should say is, I'm very grateful to Stefan Molyneux, because when my son, my firstborn, was like close to 1, that's when I first heard of Stefan Molyneux and his the spanking perspective, and that's how I got introduced to him. And then everything else came after that. From
Oh, really?
yeah, so
So you started with spanking. Did you already have sort of a liberty mindset before that, or is it mostly just
in a
spanking that
sense,
started?
well, I mean, I grew up with holistic. I'm an acupuncturist, Chinese herbalist, Eastern nutritionist. So I was, very much into nutrition and, learning about, GMO foods and vaccinations and Monsanto and things like that. So I was against those things already, but I didn't realize the bigger picture, voluntarism, and so I just started to apply those voluntarist principles to parenting, and it all came together. And actually, you know what? Taoism, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Taoism, which is the philosophical backbone of Chinese medicine. Taoists are basically the first libertarians, or you can say voluntarists.
Yeah, I don't know much about.
Yeah.
About that.
It's really like a live and let live philosophy. It's like, you read the book, the Tao Te Ching, it's like 2,500 years old. But a lot of the stuff he says, it's like all about yielding, using your opponent's force against him, right? By yielding. So it's not about brute force. It's about the power of the feminine energy, basically. And that the soft overcomes the hard, right? Water over time overcomes even the hardest of stones, right? So that's kind of what influenced me. And so that's why voluntarism basically, it just made a lot of sense. It clicked, and then the peaceful parenting and the, no spanking and all that kind of stuff. It just made sense to me. So I've been reading all this stuff and teaching her, and so we're basically on the same page. So that's good.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, we haven't had too much resistance from my family, and or my wife's family. They still get sort of antsy and curious about asking, but they don't get angry anymore. When we first moved down here to South Carolina, we were meeting new people left and right, and it was we had just taken the kids out of school to start unschooling, and I came up. I've learned how to answer that question about 100 different ways so that people don't get offended.
Yeah.
Or I have other ways of sort of provoking people as well to see if as they sort of understand, can I push it a little bit further and have them sort of self-examine a bit too. And I've had some uncomfortable conversations. I've had some productive conversations. But a lot of times, people, you say you're an anarchist, and they're like, "Oh, that's interesting." But then you say, "Well, we don't think school's right," and then they get angry. So it can you really have to tiptoe. People are gonna, or you're gonna get yelled at, or they're gonna be insulted. To be gentle, I say things like, "Well, it works out for my family. We have a lot of time at home, and we prefer to do, to sleep in, and people don't get too upset." But if I say, I think schooling is the largest waste of time ever invented in all of humanity, in all history, and that it's fundamentally immoral, then, someone's going to spit on me or punch me in the face.
Right. Yeah, some people, they give me the argument, well, you went to public school and you turned out okay. It's just an interesting argument, and I get approached that one of two ways. The first way being, well, if I was physically abused as a child and then I grew up to be a successful businessman, would you say, well, look, you were physically abused and you turned out, so that does that justify the prior violation of consent, violation of human rights? No, of course not. And then the other thing is the Bastiat's seen and the unseen, right? So that's the problem with statism, is that they look at the bridges, they look at the military, they look at NASA, they look at all these things that government has supposedly created, but they don't look at what was destroyed, the potential that was annihilated as a result of the force that was required to construct those things, right? So the unseen escapes everybody, and the same thing with public school. 12 years was robbed of everyone who went to public school because they weren't able to pursue the things that they wanted to pursue, voluntarily, things that they were passionate about. That was eliminated, that was sidetracked, and that's what you don't see. That's what you don't see, what people could have become, right?
Yeah, no, I also I have another, on my blog, there's an article called, I think it's called Six Sigma, which is about when school fails to do what it was supposed to do, meaning when it fails to make you obedient and conformist. And I have a little bit of theory that a lot of probably free thinkers are failed school projects. But what I realized as I thought about this is that there was a lot of damage. You say, well, you turned out okay and you went to public school. It took me probably a good 10 years, 15 years to sort of deschool myself. And I didn't really know that I had to be deschooled. I was just sort of stumbling through it and saying, because I immediately after I finished college, I went to Boston and eventually got a job as a management consultant where I worked 70, 80 hours a week.
Wow.
At PricewaterhouseCoopers.
Wow.
And, everything in my mentality was like, I have to get this job. I have to be successful. I have to go to the next station. And regardless of how much I hate this, I'm going to, be a management consultant at this prestigious firm. And I did it, in a way of just sort of to fulfill the continuation of how I thought life was supposed to go on, and then to make my parents happy. And then to prove myself that I have this worth in the world.
Yeah.
And it took me so much analysis to sort of unwind from that, and then do other things, to eventually sort of free myself, to get myself out of obligation, out of other people's expectations. And I think I did it, but I didn't know I was doing it or had to know how to do it. Now, take another person. I have a friend, Zach, who is 22, and he just dropped out of a very prestigious university, and he already knows now that he has to deschool himself. But he's 22, and he already can sort of begin that analysis and that process in a very productive way very early. So he not going to waste not only the 12 years, but then the other 15 years that I had to deprogram. And then I have another friend, Isaac, who was unschooled himself, and he didn't have to deschool, and he pretty much began his adulthood around the age of 14 or 15. Was already buying and flipping houses. He did get his college degree by the time everyone else finished high school.
Wow.
And then at now I think he's 30 and has already started his own venture funded startup 3 years ago. So it's just you say like, oh, you went to school and you turned out okay, and it's again like you say about what the opportunities that you don't see is that there actually, I think there is real damage that is inflicted on people, and they probably just can't see it because it's their state of nature.
Yeah, and so unlike you guys, my family, I get considerable resistance because we're pretty much the only ones that do this in our family, and
or in this whole state of New York, practically. I would bet, right?
Although,
I mean, no one up in Boston would ever homeschools.
Oh, really?
That was completely unheard of.
I mean, I have been able to get in touch with a lot of homeschoolers and unschoolers here through Facebook groups, and one voluntarist on Facebook I met who actually lives in Long Island, where actually we do the Seeds of Liberty podcast, me and him and another guy from Alabama. But yeah, so it's wonderful to meet people. We are scattered and far apart, but we do get together occasionally, and it's awesome, and and I love it because that's one of the other criticisms that people have is what about socialization? Which is, to me, implies that they think that homeschooling means you lock your kid in a room and you throw books at them.
Yeah, you make them quilt.
Yeah,
basically.
Yeah, and that's it. You don't meet people, which is completely ridiculous. Of course, every single day we go out to the park, to the playground, to museums, to hiking or trails or whatever. And we're always meeting people, and it's beautiful. I absolutely love it. And my kids have no problem talking to any, how I noticed this in some families where the parent would tell their child, sit there, be quiet, don't move, and the child just listens, like sits there like a robot, just sits there obedient and does not move. And that's kind of scary to me when I see that. I'm like, when I see a child respond like that to a parent, what makes me think is, how is the home? How much beating is there, or yelling, or punishment is there in the home for the child to be that obedient to their parent, right? And it's just so sad, because that's not what a child should be. A child shouldn't sit and be quiet like that. It should be running around and playing and having fun, shrieking, with joy. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So your 5-year-old would be going to kindergarten this year.
Yeah.
So it's going to get real, right? So this is if you've been getting resistance from your family. Once he's actually supposed to be getting on the school bus or whatever, it'll probably be much more apparent that you're not just all talk with the unschooling stuff, right?
Yeah, my kids, they see the school bus passing. They know what the school bus is because we go to the library, and most books at the library, especially around let's say the beginning of the school year, September, it's like first day of kindergarten, first day of first grade, first day of whatever. And so they talk about it's in everything. It's amazing how saturated the children's literature is of government, not just government schooling, but just government. Like there's some books and some shows that they watch, or I just look at it, I'm like, man, all they're learning about is pure government stuff. Like this show called Caillou. They like to watch this show. Yeah. So I was watching it one day, and I noticed all the government jobs. Like, he's learning about different jobs, and every single job was a government job. Garbage man, the postal worker, the teacher, the policeman. Every single one was a government. I'm like, don't learn about non-government stuff?
Yeah, well, I think Caillou is actually produced by the Canadian government.
Oh, is it? Oh my god.
Yeah, and if you the preschool channels are almost if you look at the source of the programming, about half of it is sourced from like Australian government, and the other half from Canadian government.
Wow. Okay.
If you just go through the whole list of shows, now we haven't had those shows on for a bit because my kids are a little bit older.
Yeah.
But I used to sort of look them up.
Wow.
At one point, I bought the URL Prisoner of Kids TV, which I was going to start a sort of information site to sort of analyze children's television, but I never got it off the ground.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so another thing I wanted to say is they see the school bus in our neighborhood dropping kids off, at 3:00, something like that, and so they know what it is. It takes the kids to school, and I basically have told them, do you want to go to school? No. Why? School's not fun. I'm like, okay, that's good enough for me.
Well, when we asked our kids, we had a conversation with them when we were taking them out of public school. And again, I don't know if I told you the story on the air or before we started recording. But I had sent my kids to public school just as soon as they became school aged, just like I was, and I hadn't given it much thought. And it wasn't until I had this long process of research and intellectual argument building and then emotional argument building that I was able to, and then convincing my wife as well, that I was able to take them out. But when I said, how would you like not go to school anymore? Their eyes just got really wide, and they're like, really? And I'm like, well, it's up to you. You can if you want to go. And both kids said, hell no, we're not going to go anymore.
How far advanced were they?
My daughter was halfway through 3rd grade, and my son was halfway through kindergarten. So my daughter did go to quite a bit of school before I righted my ship.
So was she happier than your son? Wait, the older one is a daughter, you said?
Yeah, my older one's a daughter, and
So was she happier to leave it than your son? Or they were both happy?
No, my son expressed more outward joy.
Oh, really?
For not having to go. He really disliked it.
Okay.
And then we have tons of kids that come over that are school kids from the neighborhood, and I always survey them about whether they want to go to school or not.
Oh, I do that too. I love doing that.
And the response is 100% no, I hate school.
Yeah, I do that too. I'm like even later, 9 or 10 years old, I'm like, you go to school? Yeah. Do you like it? So why do you go? Because I have to. It's so sad.
Yeah, I have an idea on my sort of project to-do list that I want to do sort of a puppet show / cartoon on unschooling that's directly for kids to put on YouTube. Mm-hmm. That has all of these, I'll sort of repackage the 54 arguments, put them into the favor of the child in some way that they can consume it.
Cool.
Which I think I don't. You can't hold me accountable for when this is going to be done, but I and I could imagine receiving death threats as well
Oh, I
for
know.
doing it. But if we could, if we can't convince parents, maybe there's some way we can begin convincing the kids.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think Brett Venat is sort of trying to do that to some degree with high school kids. He tries to, although I find his podcast to be appealing to me, and I'm 44 years old, but to actually try to start convincing the kids that they shouldn't be in school might be an interesting angle to pursue.
Yeah, I have a friend who wants to take her kid out, but the thing is, if they stay there for long enough, they will become like, I guess, they will, not desire to be free of it, because they form their connection, they form their friends, their cliques and everything, and then they kind of don't want to leave because all their the people they know, all the friends they had, they gain are in school. And so I've seen some people, when they wait long enough, like let's say 9th or 10th grade, they don't want to leave because of all the, all of that. And so, yeah, if you can do it the earliest possible.
Yeah, well, if you're in high school, you also sort of see graduation pending, and you've been told that, if you don't get that degree,
Yeah,
that you're gonna be worthless. You're gonna be poor and destitute, and without an identity for the end of days. You won't get into college, then you won't get a good job. So there's a lot of pressure to do that. Now, what I wish, if everybody, if they just left the school building open with some teachers there, then there's a good chance that when my kids got older, I'd say go over there and take a math class, and go play the dodgeball or whatever when you feel like it. But there's no sort of either or. It's not like you can just show up and make a pot and sing a song and then like one day a week and then go home.
Yeah. Pick and choose, right? A la carte.
Yeah, that would be, then they could go hang out, if they when they're older and they want to meet their boyfriend or girlfriend.
Yeah.
The socialization issue is BS for the most part. Kids do get out, but the sad part is 90% of kids are all locked up during the day for most of the day, and then they have to come home and they got to do homework and get their shower and their meal or whatever, and then get in bed early enough. The kids in our neighborhood have to get up around 5:30 in the morning if they want to have breakfast and stuff before the bus comes at 6:15. A lot of them don't get home until the earliest is 3:15, but a lot of kids are then put into latchkey type programs and don't get picked up by their parents till 5:30, and then have to be in bed by 7:30 if they're gonna make that 5:30 wake up time. So they only have these families are all sort of cooking with like about an hour and a half of family time per day, and that's probably a lot of that's like in the morning it's like get up, eat your breakfast, hurry up, but go get on the bus, and then at home it's like do your homework. You've only got 45 minutes before you have to go to bed. And unfortunately for our kids, that means there's not a lot of time where the other neighborhood kids are around. So the weekends they're big fun fest with the other kids, and we meet other unschooling families. My kids have horseback lessons and taekwondo and other homeschooling stuff like that. But I sort of wish even more, like just 10% more of the kids were sort of freed from the school system. It would just even be nice to have kids around the neighborhood more often.
Yeah,
and I don't really understand parents who decide to have children and then decide to only to delegate almost the entirety of their raising to the state. It just seems really weird, and it seems like it creates more tension than it's worth.
Yeah, it's funny. When people criticize me for the homeschooling and unschooling model, one of the things I say also is, who do you think does more research and educates themselves more? The people who send their kids to public school, or the people that choose to homeschool? Like, do people just wake up and say, you know what? Forget school. I'm just gonna keep them home. Why? I don't know why. Nobody. Yeah. It's like we are homeschooling in general, or unschoolers or volunteers are pretty well read, and competent in expressing these ideas, and we have done this. Like, this is not a decision that we do to make more friends.
Yeah, or enter in very lightly, because you have to, especially if you were schooled yourself, you have to sort of violate every bit of indoctrination and programming that you've already had inflicted upon you, and then you have to defy every one of your neighbors and every person in your family, and the whole 7% of the rest of the world who somehow have the strong conviction that school is good, but at the same time didn't even spend 5 minutes thinking about it.
Yeah.
And I know this to be true because I didn't spend 5 minutes thinking about it before I put my kids on the school bus. I think my wife looked up, and we wouldn't even think about who their teachers would be or even what school they'd go to. We just picked the one that that was open up in our town, that was closest to our house. And you just look at the schedule, and it's like, fill out this form, and then make sure your kid's at the bus stop on this day, and that's it. To unschool, I probably I had to listen to 1,000 hours of free domain radio podcast. I read 6 or 7 books. I researched curricula before I was convinced of unschooling. Yeah, I mean, it took me probably it was a solid year worth of research and intellectual case making before I could make this decision. And I know no public school parent is doing anywhere near that much research or thought before making a decision that not only affects 15,000 hours of their child's time, but one that they'll violently defend, if anyone says it's wrong. So it's bizarre. It's truly bizarre. I agree.
Yeah, and then when you tell them all that, all the things you read and all the podcasts you listen to, then they come back with like a very simpleton type argument. What about socialization? Did you even consider socialization? What the hell are you talking about? You think I never considered that, right? I mean, it's almost insulting, but then we can't like be angry. You gotta talk calmly and just because another thing that I get is when you tell people, especially family, when you tell people that you're going to not send your kids to public school, you're going to homeschool, they get offended because they take it personally. It's a personal affront to how they raised you, right? Or how they raised your cousins or whatever, your family members or your parents. And that's sad. It's like everybody has to be like you, like we have to be carbon copies of our parents. How can we progress as a species if we are carbon copies of our parents?
No, that's a great point. Well, I'd like to think, I don't know if this is true, but that people quickly do both the intellectual and the sort of moral analysis. When you say they don't have to go to school, and they look at what could be a potential mistake that they made, and that's sort of what I sort of think that's going on a lot of times, is that they're even less concerned about your children or my in-laws would be less worried about my children than just the magnifying being put on their decision making.
And the same thing applies to spanking too.
Sure. Right? Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. If you now, both my wife and I are lucky that our parents never hit us.
Oh, okay, great.
And so I didn't even have to do, when it came to our children, we never even had a conversation about whether we were going to spank or not spank. We just presumed that we weren't going to, and haven't. So that wasn't. Because I have a very good friend who it was kind of a fairly large emotional awakening when he realized that he shouldn't be spanking his child. And he reversed it quickly before his child was very old, but it's a really sort of long-lasting bruise in his brain. Mm-hmm. And most people don't even go through that transformation process. If they think spanking is just, they just keep on doing it. So it's a blessing of sort that he managed to go through the transformation and come out the other end better for it. And I'm just delighted that my wife and I never had to think about it. And that's if I can just expand on that. Yeah. Hopefully, when my kids are having their children, they're not going to have to go through this emotional and intellectual discovery process to make sure their kids don't go to school. Mm-hmm. This again, to talk about another friend who was unschooled. there was no consideration for putting their kids into school for even a second. It was just as automatic as it would be for a public school person to send their kids to public schools. No research required. So it'd almost be better if I don't know if this is right, but it may be better if our children don't need to have an intellectual discovery process to decide not to send their kids to school.
Well, it's just called a moral advancement of the species.
That's a great title for it. Yeah,
because it's like so much of what we do is the appeal to popularity or the appeal to antiquity, right? Appeal to popularity being I'm doing this because everybody's doing it, right? No thought required. Or appeal to antiquity, I'm doing this because it has been done this way for decades or centuries, and so who am I to question it, right?
Yeah, those even supersede the argument from authority, because even if you probably didn't have the compulsory attendance laws, the public school would still probably produce people who automatically put them in, and we're just as terrified of the kids, missing a day, not missing a day, or not missing an assignment.
Yeah. So when we, a lot of people they value culture. Like culture is a wonderful thing, right? Various, places of the world have their own cultures and customs and things, and that could be good, right? But the problem is that culture stifles creativity and ingenuity and critical thinking. Like people do things not because they thought about it, but because everyone around them doing it has been doing it that way for thousands of years, right, or hundreds of years, and that's not really. I don't think that's conducive for, again, the moral or intellectual advancement of the species, right? Galileo and Kepler, they didn't do what they did because they were going to make more friends, but because that's what they saw as the truth, regardless of if they were, persecuted by the church or executed as a result of it, right? And that's called advancement, right?
Yeah. So that'd be interesting if. So right now, if public school parents don't think about it for a second, and unschooling parents have to wrestle with their minds for, and listen to 1,000 podcasts and everything to make the decision, would unschool children as adults still think about this, but maybe think about education in terms of epistemology or in methodology of how to learn, and not even have to clutter their minds with do I have this the cinder block building that you're supposed to go to or not. And so they could still have this intellectual pursuit of understanding education, but not have it being cluttered with the violence and the tediousness of the public education system.
Well, the way I look at it is no, I don't think successive generations of unschoolers will just follow because their parents did it. Where I think they'll basically do things as they understand it intellectually, right? Because the idea of unschooling is to encourage kids to follow their passions, to pursue what they're interested in, and it's a belief in the individual, right? It's not about a collective, right? So they will I think they will constantly be reevaluating their position, because that's what I think unschooling parents promote in their kids. You want them to think for themselves and to not take things at face value, right, and question everything, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's also going to be unschooling is also freedom. So it's freedom to do what you want.
Yeah.
Not being told what to do. And I think if you experience freedom growing up, you're going to resist not having freedom when you're older. And it's not going to be, again, that the prolongment of antiquity or of culture. Mm-hmm. There'll be a repulsion to not being free, and then hopefully a natural curiosity and to learn and explore.
Let me give you another argument. One of my family members gave. I don't know if you included this in your article, but he said. He said, what do you want your kids to be? Don't you want them to be educated, have a good job, have a good house, have a good car? Don't you want that? And my answer was, no, I want them to be happy first and foremost. Those other things don't matter, because if they have those things and they're not happy, then none of it matters. Like, what that's the other thing about public education is delayed gratification, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
For 12 years, you can't do what you want to do because you have to wait to graduation, and then you can't do what you want to do because you got to go to college, and you can't wait because you got to get a good job, and
Yeah, and somewhere there, when you're like 67 years old, there's a fishing boat and a fishing pole there for you. When you could have, when you were 5 years old, you probably could have already, spent the day fishing to start with.
Right. So it's kind of amazing how that's so revolutionary. It's like, what? People, the goal is not to be happy, or the goal is to be happy. How can that be revolutionary? Like I was interviewing, I interviewed Dana Martin, Radical Unschooler. Have you heard of her?
Cool.
Yeah, she's awesome.
Yeah,
lady.
I've watched a couple of her videos.
Oh, she's awesome.
Checked out her website.
Oh, she's an awesome lady, and she's like, kindness is revolutionary. Isn't that an amazing statement? How can kindness be revolutionary? But the problem is people don't apply that. They apply that to their family and to their close friends, let's say, but they don't apply that to everyone. They don't apply that to their neighbor or somebody in another country. Like who cares about them? It's like, it's what's good for society, right? That's why we need taxes, right? So kindness and compassion is not universal. And if it was, we'd all be voluntarists, right?
Yeah, it's well, going back to how we opened the conversation is, are we really the radicals?
Yeah.
To think that kindness and peace and these sort of wonderful themes, shouldn't be prevalent.
Yeah. So I was reading your article and it really made a very, very comprehensive case. Some of the things that I haven't, like one of the things that I never really considered before I read your article was about the homework thing and about how that robs free time at home. It's not enough that they rob your free time when you're in school, but now they send you home with things to do where you can't even do stuff that you want to do because you got to do your homework, right?
And then they enlist the parents in that as well. And when my girl was in school, that was a great point of frustration for our family, because my wife would tire of helping her, and she'd say, "Jeff, why don't you go help Addie with her homework?" And I'd be like, "Well, I don't want to do homework myself." And I never did homework when I was a kid, so I would just be like, "Well, let's just have her not do it. She doesn't want to do it right now." But if you sent the kid back to school the next day without the homework done, that there would be some hell to pay from the teacher. And this is another article in my blog. I finally thought about this for a few minutes, and let's say you're probably given about 10,000 school assignments between homework and classwork at school over the course of the time you're there. Mm-hmm. If there was at least 2 a day for the 160 days, times 12, and every single one of them is expected to be done, regardless of how irrelevant or relevant or joyful or joyless it is. There's not one thing in that 10,000 page raft of assignments where you say, like, well, these ones don't really apply to me, so I'm not going to do them.
Yeah, right.
If you ask a parent at public school, like, what percent of the assignments do you expect your kids to do? There's only one answer. It's all of them. Mm-hmm. And that gets more and more ridiculous. The more I think about it, that anyone could possibly put forth, 10,000 or 1,000 different assignments that would be absolutely relevant to every single student in the entire, United States.
Yeah, and another interesting thing is, like my family member was saying, how there are certain things that people need to learn in order to be a functioning member of society, right? I'm like,
yeah.
All right, so even if you thought that was a true thing, how would you know, or how would anybody know, bureaucrat or, a teacher or superintendent, how would anybody know out of the, millions or billions of bits of information out there, articles and books that have been written, what is pertinent for you to know? And in order for you to know that, you would have to be a fortune teller, right? Because the world is constantly changing, new technology coming out all the time, and we think that in order to get kids to be functioning, we have to get them in a place where they're going to be at least for 12 years, maybe 13, I guess. And so they start now, they'll be out in 28, and we can predict what life will be like, and that information is relevant to that time period.
Yeah, well, I mean, the job they're going to have in 2028 probably hasn't been invented yet.
Yeah, exactly.
So I did try to say, like, if I could pick the minimal amount of knowledge that I thought was universally applicable to everybody, where you might have the case to use a weak case to use either compulsion or whatever to teach people, it probably would be how to read and write, and then how to do enough math to buy carpeting. And that would probably be enough to be the minimal. You'd say that's how much required schooling is universally applicable to every single person. And that's it. But that's probably only 100 or 200 hours of instruction tops.
Yeah.
So you'd cut out the other 12 and 3/4 of a year of school at that point.
Yeah, and the other great argument is, I ask people, how did you learn how to speak?
Mm-hmm.
Were you forced to learn how to speak in a classroom with a teacher and books? No, of course not. We all learn how to speak by being around people who speak, right? We just acquire the knowledge and the ability by just seeing other people do it. That's how babies learn. So why can't you apply that same thought process to reading and writing? If you're around people that read and write, perhaps you're going to start learning to read and write. If you want to function in society, you're going to have to learn how to read. So it's a necessity. So it doesn't have to be forced onto the people. That's the other thing.
It doesn't have to be forced. And then if you really take a serious look at what they teach in school, pretty much everything that most people do for a job has nothing to do with Elizabethan poetry or quadratic equations or playing dodgeball.
Right.
So all sort of occupational knowledge is gained outside of school. And then if you look at the knowledge that people enjoy, like all the sort of fun subjects that we like economics and ethics and history, not non-political history, rather, philosophy, are all things that they never really tackle within public school. And all the things that are useful, so that all the enjoyable knowledge, or even if you just sort of like football stats or learning Star Trek languages, none of that is taught at school. All the enjoyable information, and then all the useful information, like how to cook a meal, how to apply for a mortgage, how to buy a car, how to drive a car. All those kind of things aren't taught in school either, probably because they're too important to learn. Mm-hmm. So it sort of seems that the knowledge that this one size fits all sort of factory schooling neither provides information that's useful, occupational, or enjoyable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then some people counter like, "Well, you're so arrogant. You think you know everything and you can teach your kids everything there is to know." These people at the school, they're licensed. They've gone through many years of education. They're competent in teaching this stuff.
Yeah,
and I'm like, well, I don't think I can teach them everything. Of course not. There's a lot of things I'm learning myself, and it's a process, and we're learning together. And the other thing is, I don't have to be a chef to know how to cook a dinner, right? I don't have to be a NASCAR driver to know how to drive a car, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't have to be the best of the best to do what a teacher does. So,
well, and a teacher's kind of a suspect position, anyways, because they literally went to their 13 years of public school.
Yeah.
Then sort of to probably a fairly mediocre college, and then right back into the school system. So what could have they have learned? That wasn't just from the boring processes of lecturing. Mm-hmm. So they haven't necessarily really seen the world outside of school ever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Right after college, they go right back to school, right?
Yeah, I mean, they never go into the market. They never do a trade for a while, or even an art teacher probably wasn't going to spend too much time actually trying to be an artist, etc.
Yeah, actually, that's what I posted recently. One of my articles on Facebook, which is government schools are prisons for the young. And one woman commented, she's like, I'm a school teacher, and I find it irritating that so many people, talk bad about, public school and about teachers. And, I'm a really good person. I really want to teach the kids, and I have good intentions, right? So I would appreciate it if you stop talking bad about us. And I respond to those people by saying, I don't think teachers are evil or wicked or trying to, brainwash or, indoctrinate the kids. I think most people go into those teaching positions with genuinely good intentions, right? The problem is the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? So good intentions. Obama has good intentions when he passes, minimum wage laws, when he passes Obamacare. He has good intentions. Maybe, I don't know. It's hard to say, but it seems like he has good intentions, right? So good intentions are not enough. And frequently, good intentions lead to the complete opposite result, right? So...
Yeah, well, Brett Venat said this once on his show that anytime they make a movie about a spectacular teacher, it's because the teacher did everything opposite to what they were supposed to do in the public school system. It's always someone who then has, takes the kids out of school, or he uses his own money to buy something different, or he brings in his own books. He always has to violate the public school system to be an exceptional teacher. Mm-hmm. And so if you think of all these well-intentioned teachers are, forced into a system of incentives and curricula and everything, that probably ruins their ability to make good on that desire to just do up the best for the children. And so ultimately they're forced to teach to the test because that's what drives their state funding. And if they make it long enough in the institution, they probably will be ruined anyways.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And then the other thing I tell people is, if you really think that public school gives people, useful knowledge, just look at the jobs that a high school graduate gets. Let's say he doesn't go to college. What kind of jobs do they get? Okay. I would assume if you spent 12 years of your life learning a profession or a discipline, you would be sufficiently masterful at that profession, right? 12 years is a long time. I would assume you would be masterful at multiple disciplines after 12 years, right? But the only thing that college or that high school graduates can get is a minimum wage job, flipping burgers, going to, working at Starbucks or Barnes & Nobles or Dunkin' Donuts. Like, what kind of a reflection?
Yeah, what kind of 12 years of education to get a wage that the people who are paying it are actually forced to pay.
They can't pay below because it's illegal, right?
Yeah. So really, the kids might be worth just the handful of change or something by that time. Well, they've been taught to be dependent and not to make, even if they're not taught hard skills or worthwhile knowledge, they're also taught to be completely dependent. Raise your hand if you have to go to the bathroom. You can't even make the smallest decision or be unsupervised for a moment for that entire time. And then right when they're done, there's one day where they're in school and they can't make a single decision. And then the next day it's like, go work and be valuable. And it's almost, it'd be almost impossible to find someone that you could actually delegate authority and responsibilities to after telling them that they were incapable of doing that for so long.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And that almost kind of saddens me to say that.
Yeah, it's true. Those are the unwritten lessons that every kid learns and is drilled in. That you are not an individual, right? You are part of the classroom collective or even the school collective, right? You just sit in your desk, you be quiet, you listen, you memorize the information so you can spit it back on a test, and then you will be praised.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're sufficiently good, you will go to the next level up where you're given more information to memorize and regurgitate on a test.
But very rarely would you actually have to do something. Learn by participating, or get to pick out what you want to learn.
Yeah. So before we sign off, can you just I know you mentioned the taekwondo and the horseback riding, but just go into a little bit of what's your method for unschooling and homeschooling, and how do you apply it for yourself?
We don't have a method. We don't really do anything that's educational. Now, before we started, there was a great level of comfort in us researching curriculum and seeing homeschooling books and textbooks that you could bring home, and online learning programs like Time for Learning or Khan Academy. And we bought a lot of that stuff and stacked it on a table, and then have never used it. We did when we started. We bought both of the older children their own laptop computers, which they use extensively, and so there's no education. And since they're young, it's mostly a lot of playing. My daughter really likes to go to the store and to cook, and so that's what she spends a lot of her time doing. My son wants to be a computer programmer, and he spends a lot of time on his computer, a lot of time playing video games, of course. When they do want to learn something or find out about something, we just tell them to go look it up for the most part. So, how many moons are in the solar system? Well, go Google that.
Yeah, I do that too. It's great.
Or we'll find a documentary on Netflix and watch it.
Yeah.
We try to do some real stuff. We have a huge art cabinet. We have vegetable garden in the back in pots that they take care of. So just stuff like that. They're just free. We're not doing any kind of schooling or anything.
That's great.
They do take, again, we had horseback riding classes. They had a Harry Potter camp last week where it was mostly sort of a science camp.
Cool.
The Taekwondo is just for homeschool kids. That's during the week, and they just got their blue belts there. They're halfway to black belt.
Wow.
So they'll be able to, but I don't know, beat people up.
It's kind of funny. Something just came to mind when you mentioned what your son, you said, wants to be a computer programmer, and your daughter just wants to cook, right?
Yep.
What came to mind was most kids in public schools, when you ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up? Most of them give professions that are government jobs. I just realized this now, like policeman or astronaut or a lawyer.
Teacher.
A teacher. I mean, that's just amazing to me. Like, wow. And yeah, actually, that's a great approach. When kids ask questions, that's when they're primed for learning. That's when they're receptive and they're willing to, they're inviting new information. That's great. That's so important to capitalize on that. And
now, do you have a plan for your children at this point?
So my approach is more, free and unstructured, right? Unschooling approach. My wife is half Romanian, half Hungarian. So she grew up in communist Romania, right? Mm-hmm. For 12 years of her life before she left. And so I think that had a major influence on her and how and schooling should be. And so it's been more difficult for her to reject, public schooling, although she has rejected it, but it's been difficult. And so I think she still retains that bias towards a little bit of structure. So she's looking for, like you mentioned Khan Academy. She likes that. She's looking for homeschooling curriculums, which is kind of like an oxymoron, right? Or unschooling curriculum. It doesn't really make sense.
It was. I just have to tell you. Well, at least from our experience, it was really comforting to my wife to see the Calvert curriculum. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's both a set of books and a computer portal, and it essentially replicates the entirety of public school at home.
Okay.
Short of the apple on the teacher's desk.
Okay.
And it was so comprehensive that it was just very comforting to think that if we were doing the wrong thing, that we could implement something like this and they would have everything. Mm-hmm. But that was just one step in making sort of the becoming more comfortable with the idea. Mm-hmm. And so finally, when we researched all of it, it felt really good to know what was out there and that we had actually done our due diligence. Mm-hmm. And then when we actually started unschooling, again, we resisted all the urges to do curriculum or forced activities. The one activity we do is we do read with our son, mm-hmm. Who's doesn't read yet, and there's no set schedule for unschoolers to read. Some kids don't learn, until they're 9 or 10. Others learn earlier.
But if you don't force them to read, they're never going to learn how to read.
Yeah. So we're not forcing them, but we are encouraging probably a little bit more than an unschooler proper would, and mostly because he spends so much time on the computer, and so much time, talking about how he wants to take a programming course. That I'm like, you're really going to help yourself if you figure out this whole reading thing. So we've been a little bit more encouraging of that. So that's not completely self-directed. We'll say, hey, come on, let's go practice reading.
Yeah. So there's a Larkin Rose video. Do you follow Larkin Rose at all?
I've heard him speak a couple of times.
Okay,
but I haven't read any of his books or anything.
Okay, so he's got a great channel, his YouTube channel, and a video he did a few years ago was I think it's like the purpose of edumacation, something like that. And he's basically talking about, like what I said, how do kids learn how to speak, right? Well, they can learn how to read the same way. And so basically what he's saying is that the age that a child learns how to read is not reflective of their aptitude for reading. So basically, if a child learns how to read at 9 years old, it's possible, and there's a few articles on this of unschooling parents coming out and saying, my child learned to read at 8, 9, 10 years old, and they were like prolific writers. Like, it didn't matter, or reading or writing, it didn't matter really what age they learned how to read and write. It had no bearing on their skill level of reading and writing. Like, they learned because they were so passionate and they wanted to learn. They're like, one kid I think learned from video games, like, I want to know how to read that, so he eventually taught himself. Another girl taught herself to read just by cooking, looking at a recipe book, because she was passionate about cooking, right? So that's one thing that really comforted me when I read that and I heard about other parents saying that, because that's one thing that's it's hard to free my mind of that, like, because you were taught how to read, first grade or second grade, something like that, and so you're like, well, how can you learn how to read without that, right? So it was really cool to see how so many parents have done it, and some children, I think this one girl learned how to read at like 9 years old, and then she was writing massive amounts of poetry.
Yeah, well, that's, everything I've read is that even if they don't learn until they're 10, they don't start reading Dick and Jane books. They jump right into whatever a 10-year-old reads, if that's
like Harry Potter.
Hunger Games or Harry Potter or whatever.
Right. So that really comforted me. And the other thing I wanted to say is, my son, talking about the questions, he asked me, like, I love those questions, like, what is the moon, and how far is the moon, and why is the earth heavy, and what else? He says, the other day he asked me, how many leaves are on a tree? And that was fun. And then because I listen to my podcast in the car occasionally when I'm with the kids, and I'm always listening to the Tom Woods show. And finally he asked me, Daddy, what's a Tom Woods show? So I had to explain. He's an Austrian economist, and what's that? So I was going into, and what's interesting about my son, like, I've been into precious metals. Like, that's how I got into voluntarism. Apart from the peaceful parenting, I was also really interested in precious metals and monetary history. Like, that's what really got me into it. And so I learned a lot about it. And I was purchasing silver for a while. And so my son, he would go with me to the precious metal shop, and he would buy. And so he's intimately aware of the difference between money and currency. I've taught him that. Like, this is just currency. This is paper. He's like, yeah, it's just paper. And so even when his cousin was 4 years old, they would play with this like toy cash register, and they have like quarters, dimes, and nickels. And the cousin says, Marcus, do you have any more money? He's like, no, I don't have money. I have currency. Oh, okay. So explaining what Tom Woods is like, Tom Woods talks about silver coins and gold coins. And when I said that, his eyes just lit up. He's like,
I'm not totally sure, but I think Tom Woods does have stuff for school age children, doesn't he?
He has
either through either Liberty Classroom or through the Ron Paul curriculum.
Yeah, the Ron Paul homeschooling thing. Yeah. It's I did look into that.
I haven't checked it out yet, but I
heard about it. It's like free for the like till the sixth grade level. So that's cool. So yeah, we might look into that, because if my wife wants to do anything online or pay for anything, I would trust first the Ron Paul homeschooling thing before any other thing. Although Khan Academy is really awesome too. So, but yeah. So all right. So we'll wrap up. I'm not going to keep you too long. So why don't you let people know where they can find your work? Your articles, your Facebook page.
Sure. So my website is 500years.org. That's spelled out with letters, no numbers. And there I blog, and I'm doing a very slow podcast as well. There's 2 episodes but I'm trying to get out one per month, which isn't very fast, but they're very sort of planned out and quite elaborate. The second one just went up a couple weeks ago. It's called "What Do You Want to Be When You Grow Up?" I do have a Facebook page. It's Jeff Till's FYH page, I think, something like that. You can look up for it. If you want to link that, then you can get updates. And then I'm having again, we talked about the book that's coming out with Skylar. That I think that's supposed to be out at the end of the summer, and hopefully my piece will get accepted for that. And that's it. So I'm just happy to be part of the sort of public intellectual conversation. Happy to do shows like this. So I really appreciate you having me on, Danilo.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you coming and sharing your story. So we're going to put all those links in the description for people to get in touch with you if they want to. So very cool. Thank you very much, Jeff, for coming on the show. So if anybody wants to donate to this show, it's much appreciated. You can donate through PayPal or through Bitcoin. If you really want to send gold and silver, I am not going to complain, so you can do that. You want to send me value, we'll find a way to receive it. So help out the show if you can, because freedom is not free most of the time. Right? Although government says it's free. Mm-hmm. But all right, so thank you very much, Jeff. Awesome conversation. So this is Peaceful Anarchism on the Voluntary Virtues Network, and the seedsofliberty.com and the consciousresistance.com. Wishing everyone have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye.